This book was written in a cave by a man who hasn't lost a fight in his entire life. 62-0 in sword duels. He wrote it 2 weeks before he died, and almost every principle in it applies directly to building something, staying focused, and thinking more clearly in 2026. There's one idea buried in here that ties it all together. I'm going to tell you what it is at the end of the video, so stick around. But it only makes sense once you've seen the whole picture. This is the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. Here's what I took from reading it. This is part of my book series, books I've actually read, broken down in a way that I wish someone would have explained it to me when I was first figuring things out. I'm Patrick, thanks for watching and being here. Musashi fought over 62 duels and never lost one, so obviously he knew some stuff that most people don't. Section 1. Who Miyamoto Musashi actually was. Before getting into the principles, it's worth understanding who wrote this. Musashi wasn't a philosopher who theorized about combat. He was a practitioner. Over 62 duels, 0 losses. He spent decades refining and understanding strategy through actual experience. Not through reading about it, not through watching other people do it, through doing it himself, repeatedly, with his life on the line. And the reason that matters, everything in this book comes from that place. There's no fluff in it, no padding or techniques invented to sell more courses or to promote his dojo or whatever. He wrote this 2 weeks before he died. Musashi had one filter for everything he included. Does this actually work when everything is at stake? If it didn't make it in. That's a standard most books don't come close to. He also makes a point early on that the principles of individual combat apply equally at every scale. One person, a team, a company, an army. The same strategic thinking works across all of it, which is why this book was written in 1645 by a Japanese swordman and still gets read today by entrepreneurs, athletes, military strategists, and a bunch of other people. So these are timeless bits of wisdom for you to take in. Section 2. Mastery is a continuous practice. The first major principle Musashi lays out is that mastery isn't a destination, it's a practice. Not something you arrive at and then maintain. Something you are either doing or not doing every single day. He says your mindset during training should be identical to your mindset during combat. And your mindset during everyday life should be identical to your mindset during training. One mindset, consistent all the time. So I think about this with my channel and the agency. The standard I hold my work to on a random Tuesday when nobody's watching should be the same standard I hold myself to when something matters. And the same goes for you for whatever your main thing is. Because if it isn't, you're not actually practicing mastery. You're just performing when it counts. And the gap, that integrity when no one's watching, between those two things is exactly where most people fall short. Musashi also warns about what he calls the wayward spirit, the slow drift away from the right path. This happens so gradually that you don't even notice it until you're far off course. The compounding of small bad habits, if you will, and the accumulation of minor shortcuts, each one feeling on its own like nothing, but over time, you look back and realize you've been moving in the wrong direction for months. His solution wasn't motivation or willpower. It was removing the option entirely. When something is genuinely not an option for you, it can't tempt you. Section 3. Directness of intention. This is the principle I personally think about most. Musashi calls it the direct path. The idea is simple. Know exactly what you're trying to achieve and move towards it directionally. Not just by comfortable steps or busy work that feels like progress, directly. Focusing on your main thing. He uses the example of a sword stance. Stances exist for a reason. They serve a goal, if you will. But if you get too focused on the stance itself, you'll forget what the stance is actually for, and you've already lost. He says this happens everywhere. The moment you start optimizing the form instead of serving the function, you're drifting. In modern terms, this could be like replying to emails instead of working, or organizing your to-do list. It's also not working. Planning your strategy or your plan for whatever you're going to do is not working. Those things serve the work and are important for sure, but they're not the actual main thing, the main reps that you need to be taken. So I catch myself doing this constantly, just finding productive things to do that Feel like I'm making progress instead of doing the actual one thing that actually moves the needle forward. Musashi would have no patience at all for this. The question he comes back to over and over is, what are you actually trying to cut? Everything else is a distraction. Section 4. Do not overcomplicate it. Musashi identifies 5 fundamental sword stances. Master these 5 and you can defeat anyone. Because every other technique is just a variation of the fundamentals. And people who go chasing advanced techniques before they've mastered the basics are not ahead of you. This reminds me in sales of people who go and try to learn like the advanced tonality or like the word tracks to close people, but you haven't even got the reps in of like, knocking on 100 doors or calling 100 people. You don't even have the basics of just like getting through the opening, but you're trying to get like an advanced close down. He was pretty openly critical about other schools that invented hundreds of techniques and forms just to justify charging more money. He called them commercial schools. I guess nowadays the equivalent is like a Mick Dojo, where you can just kind of like get a black belt, right? If you just show up to enough classes. If you're into the MMA world or UFC at all, like, I'm sure you've heard of this, but this relates to what Bruce Lee would talk about with, you're the man who's practiced the same kick 1,000 times instead of the man who's practiced 1,000 different kicks. People who had turned the art into a product instead of a practice. The more complexity they add, the further they drift away from what actually worked. And nobody noticed because there was no real test. In a duel, bad techniques get exposed immediately. But in a classroom with no consequences, you can teach nonsense indefinitely. Think about this in the business world. There's always a new tool, a new framework, a new approach. And most of it's just noise. You have all the information out there in the world right now. But the thing that stops a lot of people now is just information overload or like analysis paralysis. You have so many options now that you always want to optimize and pick the best option, when usually just focusing on the fundamentals is the best thing. The fundamentals of getting clients, delivering results, communicating early, those haven't changed. Or showing up early, like working hard. Like master these basic things first. Everything else is just a distraction until you do. Section 5. Focus and removing distraction. Musashi's approach to focus wasn't discipline based. He didn't rely on willpower to resist distractions. He removed distractions entirely, so they couldn't compete for his attention. When something is genuinely gone, you don't have to fight the urge to do it. The urge doesn't come. I talked about this in my Brain Rot series. The reason I deleted all my social media years ago and built a system around YouTube that resolves around the algorithm for the equation. It wasn't because I'm disciplined. It's because I changed the environment. Musashi understood this 400 years ago. If the only stimulation available to your mind is the work in front of you, your mind will find the work stimulating. That's not philosophy, that's just how your brain actually functions. He also makes a point about errors compounding. One moment of unfocused attention leads to a habit. A habit becomes a pattern. A pattern becomes a way of operating. And by the time you notice, it's deeply embedded. The time you catch it is at the first deviation, not after it's become part of how you work. Section 6. Practice over theory. Musashi is relentless on this point. Reading about something is not the same as doing it. Understanding a concept is not the same as being able to apply it. He ends most of every section with some version of, go and practice this. Research it through doing it. Because the gap between intellectual understanding and practical ability is enormous. I've felt this with everything I've built so far. I understand the theory of running ads before I ran them. I understood the theory of cold outreach before I did it. And in both cases, the moment I actually started, I realized how little I actually knew. The theory gave me a map. The practice showed me the territory, but they're not the same thing. There's so many more steps you can only see after taking the first couple. You can't see the end of the road before you start walking on it. Musashi also talks about absorbing principles versus memorizing them. This is kind of going into another problem with the school system right now, if you will. Just focused on memorizing. The people who are able to memorize the most do the best versus understanding, right? Because a lot of it is just based on being able to recite things back. But memorizing is knowing what something says. Now with the AI, I mean, you can get like a neural link chip in your head and just know everything essentially. Hook it up to Claude, right? Absorbing is knowing it so deeply that it actually changes how you act without you having to consciously think about it. That's the standard worth working towards. Not being able to recite the principle. Being someone who operates by it automatically. Section 7. Controlling rhythm. This is one of the more interesting concepts in the book, and one that I hadn't really thought about before reading. Musashi argues that everything has a rhythm: conversations, business deals, relationships, combat. There's a natural cadence to how things unfold, a recognizable sequence of actions and responses, cause and effect. And the strategist who understands the rhythm can disrupt it. Think about a conversation where you're trying to get to a decision from someone. There's a normal rhythm of how the conversation goes. If you know the rhythm well enough, you can break it at exactly the right moment and shift the dynamic entirely. Silence at an unexpected moment. A direct question when they're expecting a pitch. Sudden change of energy when the conversation is going in circles. Musashi argues these aren't tricks, these are understanding of the rhythm and how to counter it. Musashi also talks about infectious behavior, how emotional states transfer between people. Confidence is contagious. Hesitation is contagious. Panic is contagious. The person who controls their own state controls the emotional temperature of the room. I think about this in sales conversations and client calls. The energy you walk in with doesn't stay with you, it spreads. Section 8. Seize the initiative. Musashi is direct about this. Waiting is losing. The person who acts first controls the engagement. The person who reacts is always playing catch up, responding to someone else's move instead of forcing them to respond to yours. He was so committed to this principle that he actively criticized defensive stances, not because defense has no value, but because defaulting to defense means that you've already handed the initiative to your opponent. Think about this with a YouTube channel or a business. Are you waiting for the right moment to post? Are you waiting until the offer is perfect before selling? Waiting until the product is ready before talking about it? Waiting to feel ready to get in the gym? All that feels like caution, when it's actually just the surrendering of the initiative. The people who win are the ones who are already moving, when everyone is still getting ready. Musashi also makes a point that I found useful, that psychological action is movement too. Seizing the initiative doesn't always mean attacking first. It means being the one who is directing the engagement, the one who is forcing responses, or being proactive rather than reactive. So it's going to apply to like negotiation, a sales call, a cold outreach campaign, anything where there's a dynamic between two parties. Section 9. Become your enemy. One of the most tactical sections of this book is where Musashi calls becoming your enemy. The idea where you put yourself completely in the other person's position. Not to empathize, but to understand their perspective so accurately that you can predict exactly how they'll respond to your next move. In a business context, this is like before you send a proposal, try to read it as the client would. Like put yourself in the other person's shoes. What questions does it raise? Where does it feel uncertain? Or where would you hesitate if it were you? That's not just good communication, that's strategy. Musashi takes it further. If you can accurately predict how someone responds to your action, you can effectively direct them, which, as you can imagine, would probably be pretty useful if you're sword fighting someone to the death. They think they're making decisions, you already know what they'll decide. He also applies inversion here in an interesting way. If you were your own competitor, where would you attack yourself? What are your actual weaknesses? Where is your positioning vulnerable? Most people don't ask these questions because the answers are uncomfortable. So I sent another video that I thought Charlie Munger initially popularized inversion thinking, but maybe it was Miyamoto Musashi, who knows. But the answers are exactly what you need. Section 10. Adaptability and starting anew. Musashi says when a genuine impasse is reached, when the same approach keeps producing the same result, abandon it. I mean, Einstein also speaks to this, like doing the same thing over and over again with the same result is his definition of insanity. Don't tweak it, not refine it, abandon it. Start from zero with a completely fresh perspective. This is something I've had to do a few times already. When an outreach campaign just stopped working with content formats that weren't landing, or workout programs that weren't getting the results I want. There's a real pull to just keep refining, because starting over feels like admitting failure, but Musashi's frame is different. Rigidity is the actual failure. The willingness to start anew. That's the skill. He also warns about doing the same thing 3 times. If something doesn't work the first time, try again. Doesn't work the second time, adapt. If you're still doing the same thing for the 3rd time and expecting a different result, that's not persistence, that's stubbornness. Know the difference. Keep in mind, real life is a little more nuanced than sword fighting, so there is usually a gray area to a lot of this. In general, it's a good rule of thumb and something to think about at least. Section 11, The Void. The final chapter of the book is the shortest. Musashi calls it the void, or the ether, and he describes it as the state reached after so much practice and study that confusion lifts entirely. Everything becomes clear. Decisions happen without deliberation. Your actions emerge without effort. Understanding that it exists, and understanding what it takes to get there. That changes how you think about the long game. Musashi says he didn't understand the true meaning of his own way until he was 50. He was in 62 undefeated duels by this point, and he still didn't feel he truly understood it until he was 50. It means the standard isn't where you are now. It's where you're still moving towards. Here's what ties it all together. Every principle in this book, the directness, the focus, the initiative, and the adaptability, continuous practice, they all point at the same thing. Stop waiting for conditions to be right. Stop overcomplicating what you need to do. Stop defending when you should be moving. And stop mistaking busy work for real work. Musashi wrote this book in a cave at 60 years old, with 2 weeks left to live. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't doing this for money. He was just trying to write them down. What he actually knew to be true before he ran out of time. And almost everything he wrote is something most people today are doing the opposite of. The big lesson. Okay, here's what I said I'd tell you at the end. The thread running through every principle in this book. Musashi never separated training from living. For him, how you do anything is how you do everything. The mindset you bring in a Tuesday morning, when nothing's on the line, is the same mindset you'll have when everything is. There's no switch. There's no version of you that showed up differently when it really matters. There's just the person you've been practicing being every single day. About integrity, the daily habits, the standards you hold yourself to, but no one's watching. That's not preparation for something later. That is the thing. The way you show up when it doesn't count is exactly how you'll show up when it does. Musashi understood that better than almost anyone who's put words on paper, and he figured it out through over 62 duels, not 62 books, or 62 videos, or 62 courses. Read this book if you haven't. It's pretty short. You could probably finish it in a few hours. This was actually the first book that I read when I was like 16. I heard on Joe Rogan, he recommended that it was like his first book he ever read, so I thought I'd pick it up. But the principles in it are things I keep coming back to. The direct path, master the fundamentals, seize the initiative, stop waiting, start moving, focus on your main thing. Take consistent action on your main thing, and don't stop. Peace.